This is the third largest city in the world, Tokyo, capital of the Empire of Japan. Here, crowded into a metropolitan area of only 214 square miles, more than 7 million people live, work, and fight the Pacific War. According to these handsome books put out by the Japanese tourist agency prior to December 7th, 1941, quote,
"Upon emerging from Tokyo Station, the contrast between the East and West is immediately evident to the traveler. Across the plaza are large office buildings of Western architectural design, and then, straight ahead, are the grounds of the Imperial Palace and the old stone walls rising from its ancient moat and topped with fantastic pine trees. This contrast is perhaps the keynote of the metropolis. But speaking broadly, the introduction of Western architecture, ways and ideas has not yet produced many changes in the life and customs of the majority of the people of the city. The civilization evolved during 2,600 years is deeply rooted, and its contrast to the civilization transplanted from the West is a feature of great interest to every foreign visitor to Japan."
The guidebook is right. This contrast is of great interest to every foreign visitor to Japan, particularly to those who travel nowadays in B-29s, Liberators, and Flying Fortresses. But there's a reason for this contrast of architecture that the guidebook didn't mention. Let's go back to September 1st, 1923, when the greatest earthquake in modern history devastated the twin cities of Tokyo and Yokohama. On that one day, 99,331 people died in these fire-blackened ruins. And while the American relief ships rushed supplies of food and medicine to the survivors, and American Red Cross workers bound up their wounds, the Japanese empire builders were already planning the new city that was to rise on the ashes of the old. Their plans were ambitious, based on far more than mere civic enterprise. Calling in world-famous American and European architects to design modern, quake-proof structures, they rebuilt the ministries, the administration buildings, and the great industrial factories which were to house and feed the gigantic machinery of world conquest. But the millions of Japanese workers who were to man the machines in the factories had no such modern building program. They just went on living in the same kind of sprawling, flimsy, wooden paper slums that are still familiar sights in Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, Osaka, and all the other great industrial cities of Japan. Returning nightly to these tenements from the great war factories in their midst, or in thousands of cases, actually conducting small sweatshop war industries right in their own homes. Now other earthquakes are visiting them. Man-made earthquakes that have already been previewed at the Army Air Force Proving Ground Command, Eglin Field, Florida, where on the 14th of March, 1944, a directive was received from the Executive Director of the Army Air Forces Board activating a confidential service test project to be known simply as Service Test 1-44-18. Here in the Proof Department at Eglin Field is the concrete result of that test compiled in the final report on the project. Object: to determine the most effective load ratio and technique for the employment of high explosive and incendiary bombs against Japanese-type wooden structures. Well, by the 1st of April, construction on these Japanese-type wooden structures was well underway. Now, the idea was not to put up rows of picturesque Hollywood false fronts replete with useless detail, but rather to duplicate the congestion of these Japanese slum areas with relatively light and inflammable structures. A master layout was set up for 3 separate targets. Each was to consist of 118 separate units, arranged to represent sections of 4 city blocks, broken by alleys and separated by 30 and 60-foot streets. This was target 1 as it looked by April 10th. Each unit was built of well-seasoned 16 by 16-foot tent frames with walls built up of green 1-inch pine. Targets 2 and 3, located a couple of thousand feet apart on another range, were also 118-unit constructions. These units, however, consisted of 16 by 16-foot hutments with double ceilings of 1/4-inch plywood, single 1/4-inch plywood walls, and 1-inch pine floors. Meanwhile, firefighting equipment began to roll into the target areas. It consisted of two types: mobile units with hoses and water capacity roughly comparable to a city engine company, and primitive hand equipment such as might be available to householders or volunteer first-line fighters. These M69 6-pound gasoline gel incendiaries were selected by Chemical Warfare Service as the most effective bomb currently available against Japanese-type structures. For adequate coverage of the target areas, E6R2 500-pound aimable clusters of these bombs were used throughout the entire series of tests. The first test mission was flown on April 17th, when a B-17 carrying a full all-incendiary load took off against Target 1. A train of 3 aimable clusters covered approximately 2/3 of the target area. When the fire trucks arrived 4 minutes later, the blaze resulting from the merging of separate fires within these buildings had spread to a point where it no longer could be controlled. An unhit portion of the target area was prevented from burning only by the fire break protection afforded by a 60-foot street. Meanwhile, another B-17 was dropping a similar train of 3 incendiary clusters on Target 3. Most of the pattern fell short, but 5 direct hits were obtained upon the 2 small block units separated from the main target area by the 60-foot street. A single fire resulted from 1 hit and was attacked by 2 fire trucks which had arrived 3.5 minutes later. This fire was brought under control in 10 minutes from the time the firefighters went to work. The house in which the fire occurred was almost totally destroyed, but the blaze was prevented from spreading to other buildings. The other 4 hits, however, which had occurred fairly close together, had merged into an uncontrollable blaze by the time firefighting appliances had arrived, burning out every house in that entire section of the target. As a result of these tests with 100% incendiary cluster loads, we learned that fires obtained from pattern hits by M69s would merge into uncontrollable blazes if left unattended for periods of 1 to 4 minutes, the time it took for motorized firefighting equipment to get there. But that was only part of the problem. We know from A2 reports that the Japs have one of the most highly organized hand appliance firefighting systems in the world, with every civilian householder organized to stand by with bucket and shovel the moment the alarm sounds. So, in specially constructed units like this, closely resembling 2-story Japanese structures, we conducted a series of static detonation tests with our M69 gasoline gel incendiaries. It was found that those bombs which were easily reachable by hand appliances could be extinguished in a relatively few seconds. But bombs which could not be easily reached by hand appliances, or which were not attacked immediately, almost all produced appliance fires in 1 to 4 minutes. These static detonation tests all led to one inescapable conclusion. Unless first-line volunteer firefighters with hand equipment could be kept away from the incendiaries, at least momentarily, there was great danger that most of the accessible M69s would be brought under control before effective fires could develop. So we began to add 100-pound demolition bombs to the incendiary loads. Aside from the disruption of firefighting, there were 2 other possible advantages to the use of these demolition bombs with the incendiaries. One was the chance of creating piles of inflammable, kindling-like wreckage by dropping them before the incendiaries. The other was the possibility of spreading already existing fires by dropping them after the M69s. On April 22nd, the first demolition test was flown.